Hello, everyone. Welcome to this third round match in the JCSA High Schools Debate Competition for 2026. My name is Jermaine Barrett, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair adjudicator. With me on the panel are Sonique Martin and Jason Williams. I will now invite them to introduce themselves.
Good morning,
Sonique?
everyone. Morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. And for those of us who are sick, I hope you recover soon. So, today, as Jermaine says, we're looking forward to a wonderful match between two institutions of the most rounded ladies in Jamaica. And they're battling the motion. This house would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement C-190 standards over imposing strict penalties.
All right, thank you very much, Sonique. And Jason, please say hi to everyone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jason Williams, another one of the adjudicators this morning. Looking forward to hearing from everyone and a productive day.
All right, thank you very much, Jason. All right, so let us now get to meet our teams. We have on-site proposition Immaculate Conception High School, and on-site opposition, we have Montego Bay High School for girls, two all-female institutions, two of the highest performing institutions in Jamaica. And they're here now to sort of debate the issue that was just announced by Sonique. Let us now be introduced to the proposition team, Team Immaculate Conception High School. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the order in which you'll be presenting.
Okay, good morning. My name is Olivia Powell, and I will be the first propositional speaker for today's debate.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Visionay Jonas, and I am the second speaker from Side Proposition today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aisha Stone, and I am the third speaker from Side Proposition today.
All right, thank you so very much. And we now make way for the ladies from Montego Bay High School to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shantae Lawrence, and I will be the first speaker representing the opposition side today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Renee Shaw, and I am the second opposition speaker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tilka Henry, and I'm the third speaker for opposition today.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've met our judges, we've met our debaters, and now it's time for us to be introduced to the rules. Of course, the debaters are already briefed, but for your information, you'd have recognized that each team comprises three debaters. The first speaker on the team has 7 minutes, the second speaker has 6 minutes, the third speaker has 5 minutes. After the first pair of speakers, that's first proposition, first opposition, we enter a period of cross-examination. In this period, the opposition team gets to ask three questions of the proposition team and vice versa. Each question is limited to 10 seconds, each response limited to 45 seconds. We enter another period of cross-examination, and in the second period, the proposition gets a chance to go first, all right? Then all the other rules relating to the cross-examination applies just the same. All right, we'll pause for 1 minute after the second segment of cross-examination, and then we conclude our debate with the reply speakers from the Montego Bay High School for Girls, that's the opposition team, and overall we conclude the debate with the presentation from the third speaker, the reply speaker from Immaculate representing side proposition. I'm going to ask Sonique once again to announce the motion just before we get this debate started. Sonique.
For one last time, our motion is this House would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement the C-190 standards over imposing strict penalties.
All right, thank you very much, Sonique. And now we call upon the Honorable Prime Minister coming to us from the Immaculate Conception High School for Girls representing side proposition. Let's meet that speaker. Welcome. Hear, hear.
Good day, Mr. Speaker, members of this honorable House, my worthy opponents, adjudicators, and spectators. I am Olivia Powell, the first propositional speaker, and I stand before you to strongly affirm the motion. This House would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement C-190 standards over imposing strict penalties. Before I begin, I must define key terms that are essential to this debate. The C-190 Convention, the International Labour Organization's treaty establishing the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence, the first institutional instrument of its kind. Subsidies are financial or logical support from state to help businesses, especially small and medium-sized ones, build compliance systems like training, reporting mechanisms, and HR infrastructure. Penalties are strict punishments such as fines, licensing restrictions, or criminal liability imposed on businesses that fail to meet standards. With these definitions in place, it is vital to note that no one here can contest that workplace violence and harassment are abhorrent. The goal of C-190 is not symbolic condemnation, it is practical elimination. The real policy debate here today is how do we achieve real compliance, not just legal rhetoric. Today, I will substantiate our stance by addressing compliance maximization and culture change. Our second speaker, Disney Jonas, will deepen our case, and our third speaker, Aisha Stone, will rebut the proposition and summarize why the opposition wins the debate. Let us start with compliance. Because without compliance, nothing else matters. Our model is a support first, enforcement backed compliance system. The state formally adopts C-190 into law, requiring every employer to meet its standards, training policies, and internal reporting systems and independent oversight. The C-190 standards require workplaces to prevent, address, and eliminate all forms of violence and harassment, including sexual harassment and rape, through clear policies, risk assessment, and training. Employers must provide safe reporting mechanisms, support victims, investigate complaints, and take disciplinary action against perpetrators. These standards apply to all workers in all work-related contexts. But rather than starting with punishment, the state first applies subsidies, especially for small businesses, to finance training programs, compliance systems, and audits and HR restructuring. After support is given, monitoring, inspections, and transparent benchmarks are given. Only if a business fails to comply after support is provided do penalties activate. Fines, license suspensions, loss of public contracts. This model is not weak, it is strategic enforcement. Enable compliance, monitor compliance, and enforce compliance. Penalties remain part of the system, but they are used only after genuine attempts to comply have been enabled and documented. In implementing C-190 is not a one-line rule. It requires infrastructure, training, systems, cultural change, and infrastructure costs money. For many small businesses, developing economies, money is a barrier, not willingness. The limits of penalty-only models. We must ask this house, do strict penalties matter if people won't comply or report? Penalties only matter when there is reporting, enforcement, and trust, all of which are missing in penalty-first regimes. For example, in Ghana, a country grappling with workplace violence, statistics and surveys found that around 95% of violent incidents go unreported and that many workers fear reprisals or losing income. Right here in Jamaica, a security guard reported repeated harassment from her superiors and nothing was done. She feared losing her job and her family's stability. Penalty-only systems turn victims into silent prisoners. Fear of punishment replaces fear of abusers, letting harassment continue unchecked. If victims don't report, they fear losing jobs, reputations, or income. Then penalties do nothing but bury violence deeper. A model based on fear creates underreporting, silent workplaces, hidden abuses, and fragmented enforcement. This defeats C-190's aims. Penalties assume non-compliance is a choice, but most businesses fail to comply because they cannot afford compliance or lack the knowledge, systems, or support to implement it. A punishment-first model assumes businesses choose to fail, but in Jamaica, most fail because they cannot afford compliance. They lack system, expertise, and resources. Penalties alone, they don't fix anything. They punish the poor, protect the rich that can afford to implement the C-190 standards, and hide hide the real problem. Subsidies change the game. They make compliance possible for everyone. More compliance means safer workplaces, more protected workers, and real societal impact, not empty threats on paper. Penalties create fake compliance, box ticking, useless manuals, cosmetic training. Subsidies create responsibility, meaningful training, real policies, functioning reporting, and embedded safeguarding. Compliance becomes part of who you are as a business, long-term cultural, and not short-term performance. Because culture cannot be coerced, it must be built. The rapid global uptake of C190, with 50 countries ratifying it within 6 years, is proof that it is both practical and meaningful. This momentum shows that countries are not just condemning violence, they are committing to action. The switch from words to action happens when standards are matched with real capacity building, support, and enforcement mechanisms. Exactly what subsidies aim to provide. The opposition will say that strict penalties deter bad actors. We agree, deterrence does matter, but deterrence without capacity is meaningless. You cannot comply with rules you cannot even afford to implement. They will say that rights must be enforced and not funded, but rights that cannot be accessed or acted upon are rights in name only. Enforcement depends on reporting mechanisms, legal frameworks, education, and resources. And this is what subsidies put forward. This is not a choice between accountability and leniency. It is a choice between symbolic enforcement and real protection, fair-based governance and system-based reform. We want outcomes, safe workplaces, real reporting, and
Thank
sustainable
you. Thank you
culture
very much, Madam
change.
Prime Minister. You're out of time.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
temporarily rest my case.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so very much. We continue now. This time we make welcome the leader of the opposition from Montego High School for Girls to open the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
The International Labour Organization itself has reported that 1 in 5 people employed worldwide have experienced some form of violence and harassment at work. That is 700 million people. Mr. Speaker, as we stand here, 700 million human beings have gone to work and been met with fear instead of safety. Mr. Speaker, when harm is this common, do we really believe the solution is to slap a check over the issue and hope the company will behave? To these millions of victims, the proposition's proposal leaves a simple message of just wait a little longer while we write a check to your boss. We in the opposition say this is an outrage. As such, we oppose this motion. This House would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement C190 standards over imposing strict penalties because subsidies are a gift to the guilty and a slap in the face to the victims. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed adjudicators, and my fellow opponents, a pleasant morning to you all. Allow me as the first opposition speaker to enlighten you on where this motion falls short, with points of how subsidies create a moral hazard that actively delays worker safety, and how the implementation of C190 standards is impossible to verify under a subsidy scheme alone. My second speaker will then speak to how penalties are necessary to combat willful non-compliance and how justice for victims requires accountability. And my third and final speaker will then close our argument by summarizing and dismantling any argument proposition may push forward. Before I proceed to our case, it is essential that we first define all key terms as they appear in our motion. C190 refers to the International Labour Organization's Violence and Harassment Convention 2019. It is the first international treaty to recognize the right of everyone to a workplace free of violence and harassment. A subsidy is a direct or indirect payment from the government to businesses to support an activity they want to encourage. Strict penalties would involve a significant, automatic, and consistently enforced punishment or consequence imposed by the government for breaking a rule. With all important terms defined, it becomes clear as to why we oppose this motion completely, leading with the fact that subsidies create a moral hazard that actively delay worker safety. If the government announces it will pay for businesses to implement C190 standards, what rational business owner would spend their own money today when their free handouts will arrive tomorrow? They would simply wait. The proposition's plans create a perverse incentive as these subsidies will only delay action until a subsidy check arrives. This wait for the handout mentality slows down the very protection the proposition claims to want. Instead of swift action, We get a bureaucratic bottleneck of companies lining up for government cash. Workplace safety is already a legal and moral obligation. When the government subsidizes compliance, they send the message that safety is optional until funded. Even if we look at countries like Japan, France, and South Korea, which all provide subsidies, these funds do not exist in a vacuum and often were provided to businesses who made clear they needed it after clarifying the strict penalties that would be applied if companies failed to protect their employees. Countless studies on these very systems have shown that even when they did exist on their own, they quickly fell short, leading to the need of punishment and real consequences. This simply shows that subsidies can help good actors improve faster, but they do not force bad actors to change. This leads me to my second point. The implementation of C190 standards is impossible to verify under a subsidy scheme. The proposition wants to hand out money based on promises, but how does the government prove a subsidy actually changed anything? How do we measure a culture of respect? Governments around the world struggle with this exact problem. The Supreme Audit Office
Points
of
of
the Slovak
information.
Republic not accepted at this moment. The Supreme Audit Office of the Slovak Republic investigated Defense Ministry of subsidies worth approximately 4.6 million euros annually between 2022 and 2024. Their findings, the ministry breached its own laws. Applications were modified after submission. Incomplete applications were approved anyway. And most damning of all, throughout the 3 years examined, not a single on-site inspection of subsidy use was carried out. Under C190, how do we do better? A company could take subsidy money, buy posters, run one training session, and call it implementation. But has the culture changed? Has harassment stopped? We cannot know, we will not know. Strict penalties, however, are triggered by failures that are easy to identify. A complaint is filed, an investigation finds harassment occurred, the penalty is applied. Clear, straightforward, and just. Now, the proposition may claim that subsidies foster prevention. We say they create a culture of calculation. Is it cheaper to ignore C190 or apply for the subsidy? The Netherlands provides a powerful example of penalty driving real change. In 2025, the Dutch District Court of Oost-Brabant imposed criminal fines of 50,000 euros on employers in 2 workplace fatality cases. One involved a fatal fall from the balcony with defective guardrails. The other involved asphyxiation in a sugar silo with no safe work procedure. These fines were notably higher than previous penalties, sending a clear message. The court applied strict scrutiny to documented risk and supervision. What happens after these rulings? Every Dutch employer now knows that inadequate risk assessment and deficient supervision can lead to criminal prosecution and massive fines. They are proactively reviewing their safety protocols today, not waiting for a subsidy check. Even by an economic standpoint, investors do not demand subsidies. They call on governments to ratify C190 and on stakeholders to hold companies accountable for their actions, rewarding those that are taking positive steps and pressuring laggards to take meaningful action. Accountability, not handouts. Accepted?
Okay, you talk about us giving them the subsidies and they can do whatever they want with it. But in our mechanism, we talk about monitoring, we talk about transparent benchmarks, we talk about inspections. So we're not just giving them these subsidies, we are making sure that they are using them to the best of their ability. So that automatically debunks your point.
Yes, when you give them the subsidy, there may be some sort of monitoring. However, when it comes to small businesses and private businesses, this is heavily invasive and there's very little that the government can actually do when it comes to monitoring businesses that are not governmentally owned. I continue. The proposition might argue fear is negative, but for a worker facing harassment today, they do not care about the reason their boss finally acted. They just want the abuse to stop. Fear of a crippling fine is very effective reason to act now. Furthermore, what about the first victim? What about the employee harassed while their employer waits for subsidy approval? Subsidies do nothing for that victim. Strict penalties at least ensure that if a business fails in its duty, there is consequence that acknowledges the harm. We in the opposition offer a better way than what proposition may propose. Strict penalties that deter bad behavior, punishment than those who are for those who harm workers, and a straightforward enforcement method. Stand with the victims, stand for accountability, stand against this very misguided motion. The opposition rests momentarily.
Thank you very much. That was the leader of the opposition who hails from Montego High School for Girls. At this time, we move to the first rather segment of cross-examination. In this segment, Montego High School, the opposition team will ask 3 questions of the sorry, the Montego Bay High School, rather, the opposition team will ask 3 questions of the proposition team Immaculate. All right, remember each question is limited to 10 seconds, each response limited to 45 seconds. Montego Bay High School, you may now ask your questions.
You propose using money to subsidize businesses. However, where would this money come from? And isn't this just a handout to companies who should already be protecting their workers using funds that they should have already gathered?
To answer your question, we're talking about medium to small businesses that cannot afford to put in these regulations, the C-190 regulations. When we look at the disproportionate rates in which these businesses can instill these policies, we see that in businesses that are financially able or financially apt to put these in place, we have that they are overlooked, or um they have put in these regulations to say that they have put it in, but we are imposing that they get subsidies from the government, not just so that they have money to put it in place, but so that they can be monitored. I must say that the C-190 covers both public and private businesses, and it is not invasive because it has it in place in law that these inspectors can come in and ensure that what needs to be done is done.
How do you guarantee that a business that receives a subsidy actually implements C-190 standards effectively rather than just doing bare minimum box ticking exercises for that very check?
Okay, so for this question, we have already addressed it multiple times in the answer I gave before and in our POI. We keep saying that there will be inspections, there will be persons to come in and ensure that what needs to be done is done. We are not just throwing away money, we are not just giving out handouts, we are giving money for a specific purpose, for a specific reason, to protect workers, to change the culture of a workplace. We are not just giving out money so that they can buy posters, as you say, which is preposterous, but we are giving money so that they can put in the C-190 standards to protect workers in the workplace.
Montego Bay High School, do you have a third question?
Yes, sir. If subsidies are so effective, why have only 45 countries ratified C-190 and many like North Macedonia struggle with practical implementation even after ratification? Doesn't this show that money isn't the main?
Right. Okay, thank you. So, correction, 53 countries have actually ratified this C-190 regulations. And also, with any regulation or any law put in place, it cannot be perfect. Countries will struggle to implement it, but with this struggling, the solution is not to do away with the policy in its entirety. The solution is to make sure that it's being put in not symbolically, but actually to prevent in a preventative matter. And when we talk about strict penalties have been in place forever. In all of history, they have been put in place, but we still have that workplace harassment has persisted. And that proves to this house that we need something different. We need a change in culture. We need a change in the environment. We need mechanisms that will enable them to report. Thank you.
All right, so we thank Montego Bay High School for their questions. Thank you, Immaculate, for your responses. Immaculate, it's now your time to pose your questions to Montego Bay High School.
Okay, in your model earlier, you mentioned that the victims will be able to report and then it will be handled effectively. However, you failed to mention a mechanism. What happens in workplaces that lack trained HR or investigative capacity? Who conducts the investigations? What is your mechanism that you have put in place?
All right, so at the moment, there are already multiple low-cost HR assistant programs that exist. So even though you have continually mentioned that small businesses cannot afford to implement C-190, there are multiple low-cost options that they themselves can implement without the government having a primary position in that. So therefore, they can go to HR assistant programs. They can go for online training modules. They can ask for investigations. Therefore, this is a mechanism that can work, especially for small businesses.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, before you had mentioned that we are giving them these subsidies on the basis of a promise, but isn't that just what you said? They are promising to take on these lower cost initiatives to make sure that their company is doing what they need to do. But why not legalize it? Why not do it in law? Why not make the government responsible for ensuring?
That is what we were suggesting. We never suggested that it would be a promise-based system. We were suggesting that it would be based on the law.
Nevertheless, it is a legal obligation for business to protect their workers. It is a legal obligation, so therefore they should require by themselves to understand that when they're building a business, to have the measures and the money in place to protect their workers.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. How do strict penalties affect small businesses differently from large corporations with legal departments?
So the system that we are suggesting, we're not suggesting that you immediately jump to a large penalty just because this person has been harassed today. However, we are saying that these penalties would be applied and then they would further move up. So today you harass someone, we say that you fine them. The next day, if this is continuous, then we continue to up the penalty until the business has learned.
And this makes it easier for small businesses to improve their HR department so that we can do it in smaller increments compared to large businesses that really would need such a transition, given the fact that they have larger departments to be able to handle that issue.
All right, thank you very much to both schools for that period, that segment of cross-examination. We continue our debate now. At this time, we make welcome the Deputy Prime Minister who hails from Immaculate Conception High School for Girls, defending the propositions case. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, every morning at 7:45, there's a woman standing outside Halfway Tree Transport Center, adjusting her blouse in the reflection of the entrance, contemplating her safety. She's whispering, I hope today is different. Not because the commute intimidates her, but because she fears her workplace. That is the Jamaica we are debating today, and that is the Jamaica we must fix. All protocols observed, I am Dijonay Jonas, the second speaker for the proposition. Today, we proudly advance the motion. This House would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement C190 standards over imposing strict penalties. Before my substantive case, let me dismantle the opposition's misconceptions. They claim that strict penalties force compliance, but a policy can only work if businesses can actually afford it. Demanding expensive reforms without support is not compliance, it is collapse. Threatening companies without HR, legal, or compliance systems is not deterrence, it is economic sabotage. What they call accountability is simply a guise for destruction. The opposition wants us to believe that brutality masquerading as policy can fix a systemic problem. Their model rests on a simple assumption: punish these businesses until they behave. But it collapses when examined in three key ways. Punishment does not build capacity. Business that cannot comply today cannot magically comply tomorrow simply because of a fine. Punishment silences victims. Reporting harassment could shut down the small business that feeds your family, so obviously one would opt to stay silent. And punishment is not prevention, it reacts after harm, not before. Additionally, we completely agree that it is the employer's responsibility to protect their workers. The question in this debate is not who is responsible, it is how the state ensures that responsibility is fulfilled effectively. Now advancing my substantive. My first argument, SMEs are disproportionately harmed by penalties. Mr. Speaker, let us anchor this debate back in reality. According to Statin, micro, small, and medium enterprises employ 70% of Jamaica's labor force and represent the majority of businesses, including bar staff, shop workers, hairdressers, and restaurant servers. Yet the opposition wants strict penalties only after something is done, which proves to us that they have misunderstood the motion. The opposition today is proof to us that strict penalties are going to be more effective than our mechanism of working together and compliance, collaboration. Right. The truth is, strict penalties force SMEs into two impossible choices. Either one, shut down, or two, fire workers to pay fines and legal fees. When opposition says impose strict penalties, what they actually mean is collapse the backbone of Jamaica's economy. The proposition offers you a different path. With subsidies, SMEs receive Ministry of Labor training, hire HR or compliance consultants, and implement reporting systems that we have already mechanized. This will allow them to actually meet the C190 standards. Subsidies are to lift the burden, ensuring even the corner shop in Linstead or the small restaurants in Port Maria can actually comply. Companies can report issues, fix failures, and protect victims without fear. Individual perpetrators will, of course, still face their penalties, but the business survives. Reporting is encouraged and not suppressed. The impact is clear. Penalties that seem protective actually, ironically, harm victims. The workers lose their jobs, businesses close, and harassment becomes harder to detect. Under our model, SMEs are empowered, workplaces are safer, employment is stable, and C190 is effectively implemented. My second argument, prevention is more effective and ethical than punishment. The principle of this is simple. Prevention is better than cure. Reform, not retribution, is the path to real safety. ILO Convention C190, not accepted at this time, recognizes the right to a workplace free from violence and harassment. Its focus is prevention, early detection, support, and harm elimination, not punishment after the fact. Under a penalty-first model, as put forward by today's opposition, harassment has already happened, trauma is inflicted, and the victims are already suffering. The opposition comes today to celebrate punishment, while we celebrate prevention. Currently in Latin America and the Caribbean, 24% of women experience workplace harassment, and over 60% of cases go unreported. How does a penalty-heavy system fix this? We can tell you today that it does not. Punishment intervenes after harm. It is reaction, not protection. Mr. Speaker, punishment has never produced sustained compliance in Jamaica, not in schools and certainly not in workplaces. According to the Ministry of Education's 2022 Behavioral Intervention Report, punitive schools saw higher repeat infractions and dropout rates. Schools with mentorship, counseling, and restorative practices saw up to 50% reduction in violent incidents and 48% higher compliance. Punishments did not fix the behavior, supports did, and workplaces are no different. Without training, report systems, HR capacity, and early intervention, harassment continues and victims, our Jamaican workers, continue to suffer. Under the opposition, women, youth, low-income employees, and vulnerable workers remain exposed. Under the proposition, harm is reduced before it occurs. We build trust, accountability, and a culture of safety. Mr. Speaker, remember the young woman outside Half Tree Transport Center contemplating her safety. Under the opposition, she is still scared because reporting could collapse her workplace, leave her unemployed, and punish those who are doing right. Under the proposition, she walks into a workplace with higher compliance, stronger prevention, protection for SMEs and their workers. Tomorrow at 7:45, she won't have to wonder if today will be different. She will know it is because Jamaica chose prevention over panic, safety over silence, and progress over punishment. For those reasons and more, we confidently affirm the motion, not just in principle, but in practice. For a safer, fairer, stronger Jamaica, we rest our case temporarily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. And we now call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, coming to us from Montego Bay High School for Girls, to advance rather, the opposition's case. Hear, hear.
She gives me, she's a.
Do we as a society now believe that humans have inherent goodwill and moral code? If so, I would think that the justice system would not have been needed. The proposition wants us to believe that by throwing money to companies, they will somehow achieve C190 standards. However, we do not live in a fairy tale. We live in reality. At his best, man is the noblest of all animals, separated from law and justice. He is the worst. Chairperson, distinguished adjudicators, members of the audience, and members of the profession. Good day. When workers face violence and harassment, the state must make a choice: comfort businesses or protect people. We stand firm in opposition to this motion because rights are not negotiable and safety is not optional. The proposition will have you believe that subsidies are the more passionate, collaborative approach. But protection without enforcement is merely performance. When fundamental rights are at stake, accountability must come first. The motion proposes prioritizing subsidies to businesses implementing C190 standards over imposing strict penalties. While this may appear supportive, it rests on a flawed assumption. That is the assumption that non-compliance is primarily a matter of limited resources. In the Caribbean, even where countries have ratified C190, civil society and labor experts have warned that ratification alone is insufficient without national policy and legislative action to give real effect to the convention. For example, in Antigua and Barbuda, unions have stressed that ratification must be followed through by legalization and implementation if workers are to be genuinely protected. They emphasize that without these concrete measures, ratification risks being a publicity exercise rather than a meaningful change. A law without consequence is simply a recommendation. Therefore, penalties are necessary to combat willful non-compliance. Not every employer fails because they lack money. Some fail because they choose to. They choose to cut corners. They choose to prioritize profit over protection. They choose to treat workplace safety as secondary. A system built mainly on subsidies does little to change the behavior of those acting in bad faith. Additionally, the House continues to emphasize that small businesses cannot afford to implement C190. That is simply not correct. There are low-cost components associated with C90 implementation, such as simple awareness campaigns, online training modules, strengthened internal reporting channels, and updated workplace policies that can be adopted without subsidies. No, we may not be able to measure motives, but statistical evidence shows that where penalties are weak and enforcement is light, workplace safety violations occur more frequently. Voluntary incentives alone in these contexts have limited impact. This underscores that meaningful penalties are essential for real compliance. When victims fear retaliation and doubt accountability, it shows that voluntary systems alone are insufficient. Protection requires credible enforcement. For some employers, harassment prevention is viewed as an expense rather than an obligation. If the cost of non-compliance remains low, there is little incentive to change. Only when penalties outweigh the savings gained from neglect will behavior truly shift. You cannot incentivize bad faith. You must regulate it. Additionally, underreporting across Jamaica and the wider Caribbean further exposes the limits of goodwill-based systems. If voluntary measures were enough,
Point of
victims do
information.
not accept it at this moment. Victims do not continue to suffer in silence. The very existence of persistent harassment cases demonstrates that relying on cooperation alone is insufficient. Workplace safety is not a voluntary partnership. It is a legal obligation. So even if businesses are small, if it violates C190, because as was mentioned, they will have multiple strikes or opportunities. Why must it prosper? Additionally, you mentioned the school system. There's a stark difference between punishment methods for students versus adults who have a moral and legal obligation. When a worker's dignity is violated, the state must respond with credible enforcement. Without enforcement, standards become symbolic rather than protective. Most importantly, justice for victims requires accountability. When a business allows a toxic environment to fester and a worker is harassed, strict penalties serve as a public recognition that harm has occurred. They affirm that violence and harassment are not administrative oversights, but violations of human dignity. A subsidy does nothing for the victim who has already suffered. It does not acknowledge their trauma. It does not
Point
deter
of information.
not accepted at this time. It does not deter future misconduct. It does not publicly hold organizations responsible for its failure. In the Caribbean, victims have historically struggled to obtain redress. This is precisely why modern legalization emphasizes the legal remedies and enforceable consequences. Experience has shown that funding alone does not guarantee implementation, or funding focus alone does not guarantee implementation. Strong penalties do not only punish wrongdoing, but can also provide compensation and fund support systems for victims. The House focuses on easing the burden for businesses. We focus on safeguarding workers for safeguarding workers. When forced to choose between corporate comfort and human dignity, the choice should not be difficult. Subsidies may play a complementary role, but they cannot and should not replace the deterrent power of strict enforceable penalties. A right without enforcement is a promise without protection. Workers deserve more than encouragement extended to employers. They deserve guarantees secured by law. When safety is compromised, consequences must follow. Therefore, to truly uphold C-190 and defend human dignity, strict penalties must take precedence over subsidies. The opposition rests momentarily.
Thank you very much, Deputy Opposition Leader, for that speech. We now move into the second segment of cross-examination. In this segment, we'll invite the questions first from the proposition team, Immaculate Conception High School. Let us make those questions known.
Are you aware that we're not opposing penalties, but advocating for capacity building alongside existing law enforcement? And if so, why are you framing this as a punishment versus no punishment debate?
I am not framing this as a punishment versus no punishment debate. However, you guys seem to have ignored what we have said before. We are not enforcing strict, hard punishments at most or immediately. We're enforcing time by time strikes and restrictions. However, you guys seem to have believed that penalties are, you guys seem to have misconstrued what we're saying. We're not enforcing punishments like those in the medieval times. We're enforcing legal obligations, a legal right. You cannot be a business and want to protect your workers while you're refusing to actually obey the law.
Okay. This House would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement C-190 standards over imposing strict penalties. This is the motion we were given today. I must say that you have misunderstood the motion. We are saying over. You would prioritize imposing strict
Is there a
penalties
question
over
there?
changing the culture.
The question we are asking is which are you conceding to? We see you going back and forth between strict penalties and proportional penalties. What is your stance? Because you keep going back and forth between the two. Which one are you standing?
As I said before, strict penalties are the final step. However, for small businesses that have a lesser developed system, they would need to have a gradual change. So yes, it would still be penalties, like legal fines and the restriction of their license. However, for more developed companies, we can gradually have that strict change. So we did not misunderstand the motion. All penalties are strict. That is the motion. However,
All right, Immaculate, your final question.
Okay. In our mechanism, we have consistently said that there will be inspections, that we are not just giving them money to do whatever they want with. And we consistently say this, but you consistently go and misunderstand our mechanism. And you keep saying that we are not going to check, that they're not going to do it.
Immaculate, you
How do
must
you
ask a
concede?
question. Oh, good.
How do you concede with this?
Saying a statement.
are you asking a question or are you making a statement?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, I'm asking, how do you concede with the fact that in our mechanism, we have inspections, we ensure that compliance is being met? How do you concede with this as you keep misunderstanding it?
For that. In my first speaker speech, he mentioned the fact that there was a country that had subsidies and also had inspections. However, because the penalties weren't strict, and mind you, the companies in this area were very large companies, nothing happened, nothing changed because there were not strict penalties. So yes, there were subsidies, there were inspections, but because there were not strict penalties, nothing occurred, and harassment continued to go unreported and unnoticed.
All right, thank you very much, Immaculate, for those questions. Thanks as well to Montego Bay High School for those responses. Montego Bay High School, you may now pose your questions to Immaculate.
You say that these reports and fines may shut down a small business that feed families, but is it not the moral and legal responsibility of the business to ensure that their employees are protected from harassment before a report is made?
It's the moral and legal responsibility of states to ensure that its citizens, the members of its labor force or its workforce, are protected. This is why we are introducing these subsidies. This is why we're even participating in this debate to ensure that education and collaboration is what ensures that our people are safe and protected under our labor organizations.
Proposition, your model relies on goodwill. How do you force the bad faith employer who is determined to ignore C190 to change their behavior?
Okay. Oh, since the start of this debate, we have been proposing proportional punishment, which is punishment when they fail to act with the subsidies that they have been given, punishments that match the level of the offense that has occurred.
And Mr. Speaker, I must put again that they keep misunderstanding our mechanism as they have done again. Mr. Speaker, this is not on goodwill. The C190 standards would be in law. They would be in inspections. They would be ensured that they are put in place. So this argument of goodwill and of compliance only based on their feelings is not valid because that is not what our mechanism argues.
That our mechanism also exists alongside laws, criminal laws, and work labor laws that have already been written into law. It doesn't exist as its own thing. There's already criminal laws and labor laws that will support our
Thank
mechanism
you.
as
Thank you
well.
very much. Thank you. And now for the final question from Montego Bay High School.
You continuously mention these massive subsidies, but you have failed to answer over and over again, where is this money coming from? And if it is taxpayers, how do you justify this?
Taxpayers.
Okay, so the money will be coming from the government and it will be coming from the public, right? As in taxpayer money, because we know that's what you're assuming. However, we are saving the government money because they would still have to pay this money in healthcare for the workers. They will still have to pay this money in lawsuits and stuff like that. So therefore, we are still saving the government money in a way that prevents them from spending the same money later to protect their taxpayers, which are the citizens.
This is not a moral imbalance. All we're saying here is that we're using taxpayer money to protect taxpayers. There's nothing immoral about that. It's just using the resources that we have gotten from our people to in turn protect our people, which is what public service stands upon.
Thank you very much to both teams for an exciting and informative period of cross-examination. We are now going to pause for 1 minute, and at the end of the 1 minute pause, we'll resume with the reply speakers, beginning first with that from the opposition team, Montego Bay High School for Girls, and we conclude with the reply speaker from Immaculate Conception High School. Please be reminded that your reply speeches are limited to 5 minutes. Your 1 minute pause begins now. Ladies, your 1 minute pause has now come to an end. We now call upon the reply speaker, the third speaker from Montego Bay High School, to present their final submission in this debate. Hear, hear.
Are you hearing? All right, good. Good morning. Are you hearing me? We're just having trouble unmuting.
Hello, you hearing?
Yes, we're hearing you.
All right, start.
The proposition wants you to believe that subsidies are the best way to implement C190 standards. They frame it as cooperative, supportive, and economically friendly. But let us dismantle that argument clearly and decisively. Chairperson, members of the audience, members of the proposing team, my adjudicators, good morning. I stand firmly in the opposition of this motion. This House would rather provide subsidies to businesses to implement C190 standards over imposing strict penalties. Mr. Speaker, it seems as though the proposition is joining with opposition. They continuously mention penalties which we are bringing forth in this motion. Is the proposition really trying to convince themselves that government subsidies will facilitate better C190 standards? It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that the imposition of penalties provide an immediate deterrent in the workspace. Strict penalties do not destroy businesses. They force businesses to act responsibly, and responsible businesses thrive in the long run. Accountability strengthens the market. It does not weaken them. Let us be very clear. Incentives without enforcement are weak. Laws without penalties are suggestions. And when it comes to workplace violence, suggestions are not enough. Madam Speaker, let us not be fooled by the proposition's arguments. Support without strong enforcement mechanisms becomes weak policy. We say that failing to protect your employees is not an option regardless of the size. The proposition is simply using small businesses to justify lack of enforcement in the workplace. The opposition's model is superior because it ensures accountability first and assistance second, not the other way around. Our model prioritizes protection first and support second. Their model risks protecting businesses first and hoping workers benefit later. Countries and workplaces that lack strong accountability mechanisms see underreporting and low trust in the complaint system. The same ILO data shows that only about half of the victims ever report their experiences, often because they believe nothing will be done. This, Mr. Speaker, demonstrates that weak incentives alone do not build trust or accountability. Penalties backed by enforcement are what actually shifts behavior and encourage reporting. Proposition has continuously failed to mention that where the money is coming from. No. I'm sorry. Proposition has continuously failed to mention that the money is coming from taxpayers to protect taxpayers. This is absurd, as the money goes towards businesses and protects them, and a possible future victim, and what then of the first victim? Furthermore, penalties signal seriousness. Laws without consequences are merely suggestions. Strict enforcement empowers victims to come forward because they know the state stands firmly behind them. In closing, this debate is not about punishing businesses unnecessarily. It's about protecting people. It is about ensuring that every worker, regardless of gender, status, or sector, is safe from violence and harassment. Incentives may encourage goodwill, but penalties ensure justice. And when human dignity is at stake, justice must come first. It is without a doubt that businesses tend to act most decisively when non-compliance carries tangible consequences. So we reject the soft approach. We reject the idea that compliance should be rewarded like a favor, and we stand firmly in defending accountability, justice, and worker dignity. Opposition rests.
We thank you very much to the reply speaker from Team Opposition, Montego Bay High School for Girls, who just concluded the team's case. We now go to the proposition side, Immaculate Conception High School, to hear from their third speaker, the reply speaker, who will now conclude the debate overall. Hear, hear.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I will now begin. All protocols observed. I am the third speaker of the proposition. I will begin by briefly summarizing the case established by my team before moving on to rebut the opposition and demonstrate why opposition's model better achieves the goals of C190. My first speaker established our central framework, a scored first, enforcement-backed model where subsidies enable businesses to implement C190 standards before proportional penalties ensure accountability. She demonstrated that compliance can exist without capacity and that penalty-first approaches create fear, underreporting, and superficial compliance. My second speaker then showed why this matters in practice. She explained that strict penalties disproportionately harm SMEs, which form the backbone of Jamaica's economy, and that prevention through support is both more ethical and more effective than punishment after harm has already occurred. Or mother protects workers while ensuring businesses can realistically comply. With the propositions framework clearly established, I will now turn to the arguments presented by the opposition and explain why they fail to stand. Because the opposition frames this debate as a choice between comforting businesses and defending workers. It's a close choice. The proposition model does not comfort businesses. It protects workers by making compliance possible and prevention realistic. To be absolutely clear, the opposition has never argued against punishment. When abuse occurs, perpetrators are punished by law. Investigations take place, legal investigations, and legal consequences remain. What is punishment as the only or primary tool of policy. Prevention and accountability are not mutually exclusive, they are complementary. Most importantly, the opposition has already conceded this point. In their own cross-examination, they stated that punishment would increase depending on the severity of the issue. This, Mr. Speaker, is proportional punishment. Proportional punishment, they have moved away from strict penalties and toward the just enforcement model proposed by this side. Therefore, becomes simple. If one side accepts punishment, do we first enable compliance and prevent harm, or do we begin with punishment and hope compliance follows? Mr. Speaker, additionally, the opposition's model operates in an ideal world. They themselves have conceded that this is not an ideal world. Their model operates in an ideal world where victims feel safe, reporting investigation functions properly, and punishment naturally follows. But C190 exists because this is not the reality. In many workplaces, victims do not report because they fear retaliation, job loss, or being ignored. Many businesses lack trained HR systems and proper investigative mechanisms. In a penalty-first system, reporting immediately exposes the company to severe consequences, which creates incentives for HR to function primarily as a risk management tool to protect company rather than as a support system for the victim. Issues are minimized, contained, or discouraged from escalating, and abuse goes underground. Speaker, it is important to note that, Mr. Speaker, the opposition's model the opposition argues that businesses will simply wait for subsidies before protecting workers. This misunderstands our models entirely. Opposition C190 standards are already legally required. So subsidies do not remove obligation, they remove the practical barriers that prevent implementation. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the opposition reportedly claims that subsidies come only after the victim has already suffered harm. That is simply not the model presented by the proposition. Subsidies exist at the implementation stage. They fund training, reporting systems, and preventative safeguards before the incident occurs. Their purpose is precisely to reduce the likelihood of harm in the first place. To suggest that subsidies only operate after abuse has happened is a clear misrepresentation of our case. Mr. Speaker, the opposition asks this House to begin with punishment and hope compliance follows. The opposition understands that compliance must first be made possible. We enable compliance, we monitor compliance, and where necessary, we enforce compliance. That is not weakness, that is effective policy, because the goal of C190 is not harsher punishment, but fewer victims. The opposition rests our case.
All right, that brings our debate to a conclusion. We thank the third speaker there from Immaculate Conception High School. We will now pause as a panel of adjudicators to analyze and scrutinize and weigh the arguments. And we will return in a few minutes with the results and the analysis to justify the call. All right, so debaters, please stay on the platform. We will return shortly with the results. I wonder if a breakout room could be created for the judges to leave to deliberate.
Oh, I'm working on it, Jervin.
Okay, okay.
The thing is, because you're a host, I can't move you to it.
Okay, but it has been created.
Yes, it has been created.
Okay, I can create. I can move myself.
Mm.
Um, Hi, Montego Bay High School for Girls. We just wanted to ask if you wanted to have any conversation